Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I have a very special build breakdown for you guys. I am today here with Irvin and his FC RX7. Now, this thing is pretty cool. It may look like a barn find, which according to the title and thumbnail it is, but trust me, this thing has been getting a ton of work over the past 3 years?
It's been a long time.
4 years?
Probably 4 years.
Irvin's entire life.
All of it.
Pretty much has been spent working on this car.
All of my free time has gone into this car. And it doesn't necessarily show for it yet, but it will soon because we're close to the end.
We'll go over stuff that will prove to you that this car is getting a lot of love. Although right now in its current state, it doesn't look like it. It's missing a bumper. It hasn't been washed in years. The tags are expired, but trust me, there's stuff underneath that has been getting a lot of love recently. So why don't we first go over what this car is, because this was your daily driver, right?
Yes. So I got this car back in high school. It was, I believe, 2012 when I got this car. I got this car because I totaled my Mitsubishi Eclipse that I was driving at the time. And the insurance check came in and I was like, wow, this is enough for a whole new car. So I ended up keeping my Eclipse and then buying an RX7, which is a funny story about that. I didn't even want an RX7. I didn't even know what RX7s were. I just knew that I really liked Porsche 944s. And this was the closest thing I could find to one. I was like, these cars look exactly like them. And so I just bought one, not knowing anything about rotary engines, not knowing anything about RX7s. I was just like, yo, this thing is sick. I went to go test drive it with my girlfriend at the time. And apparently the day before I was going to test drive it, it got stolen and they actually found it in a ditch. And so they ended up bringing it back and they're like, oh yeah, so everything's good on it, but yeah, you're good. And I ended up buying this thing for $2,500, which at the time it was a perfectly running, beautiful, like perfect car. And that is so cheap compared to what they're going for nowadays. So I'm super stoked about that. Long story short, on the way home, one of my tie rods actually ended up falling out because the guy did not put a cotter pin in the castle nut for the tie rod. And so I just thought it needed a battery. So I was like, okay, let's go to O'Reilly's and get a battery. I drove 40 miles from this guy's house to my house, right? We got into the O'Reilly's parking lot and I was about to pull into the spot. We go to turn, my car stops turning. I'm just going straight. I'm like, what the fuck happened? Like, I don't understand. At this point, I know nothing about cars. Like, I literally have not really touched anything under the hood of a car at all. But I get out and I see my tires just sitting like this. And I look under and the tie rod is just completely out, which is great that it happened in the parking lot, because if it happened on the freeway, I would have died. But we got that fixed. And yeah, now we are, I guess, here. Yes. After a few years of driving.
So this thing was daily driven for quite a long time.
Yeah,
from all of high school, and then
I think I blew it up in 2017, 2018. So from 2012, that's like 6 years. It wasn't dailied all those years. It was dailied probably 4 years of that. But
then it sat.
Yeah.
And now is the time for it to kind of come back to life, which if you guys follow Irvin, which I'm sure a lot of you guys do, you will see there's tons of TikTok content, tons of YouTube content. This thing has been gone through in so many different ways. Every bit of this car has been touched. So why don't we first go over like the exterior. There's not too much done as of right now, right?
So at this point, this is completely stock body. We can see we got stock hood, stock fenders. Everything is basically stock. I have this one thing right over here. This is a Shine Auto little wing. I've had that for a long time. I just think it makes it look a little bit better. But other than that, the exterior is completely stock. That's just kind of how I wanted to leave it because I didn't really want to throw a lot of money into it. However, in the process of doing all this, it's not going to stay that way. Right here, we have a brand new bumper for it. Yeah, that one is going to be going on.
And are these the weird bumpers that come in like a tiny little folded up box, or is this the one that comes in a big box?
No. You would not be able to fold this thing if you tried.
What are those the bumper? You know the bumpers that come in like a tiny little like parcel,
yeah,
and then they like
those
inflate.
are KBDs. KBDs are cool if you're going to be drifting your car because they're really compliant and like they won't just shatter like something like this, a fiberglass bumper will.
Yeah.
However, they don't necessarily hold their shape well, and if you're building something you want to look nice, you want it to like not not be wavy if it goes out in the sun. Also, I don't necessarily like the shapes that they have. They have like a BN replica, and BN kits are the ugliest thing on any fucking car ever. Like, quote me in saying that. I don't give a shit. They're the worst fucking body kits. Anyways, we got that bumper. Right over here, we've got some very shiny bits. This is a carbon fiber rear diffuser that's going to be going on this.
So this gives you guys a little hint of what this car is to become. So you've seen what it is right now, and then you see these are the parts that are going on it. So there's more stuff, trust me.
This is I don't want to say and no expenses spared build, but it's getting pretty close to that. It has crippled me financially, and I don't know how long it will take for me to recover. Let's see. Other than that, that's about all the body stuff that we've got. I do have side skirts somewhere.
Somewhere.
They're right here. Those are, I believe, Aria Mimia replications, but they're Shine Auto and they're super nice. You can see how nice and flexible those are. Shine Auto makes some of the best aftermarket body parts that I've ever seen as far as fiberglass goes. You can see the difference with something like this. This is a Duraflex bumper. It's just hard as shit, super heavy, just super gross, fits like garbage. The Shine Auto stuff has always been so much nicer. I really want to get a hood from them, but I've already got a hood kind of scheduled out for this car. We imported one from Japan.
Overnight,
yeah. It actually showed up pretty quick. I was surprised. It was like 4 days or something like that for a hood.
That's not bad.
It was wild, yeah.
Okay, enough with the stuff that is to be. Let's talk about what's already been done. So should we start in the engine bay? Because that's got the biggest stuff. So why don't you pop the hood on this?
We can do that. So, like I said a few years ago, I blew this thing up. Obviously, apex seals. It munched one of them.
You know the deal.
Destroyed my engine. Right now, we have my fully rebuilt engine in here. I actually took apart my old engine, got all the parts that I could salvage out of it, and then had to get like 5 other just junk engines and put together one engine out of all of those parts with brand new rotors and brand new seals on everything. So this thing is a beast. This thing is completely perfect. Once I get it running, it'll be good for another 120,000 miles probably.
Yeah, because rotaries are like notorious for being unreliable, but well maintained, and if you can get rid of the heat, they can last a long time.
The main issue that you run into with rotaries is power. Once you start making like a good amount of power, like in the 500 to 600 or above range, then there's a lot more stuff that you have to do to make them reliable, because these things are held together by very long bolts. Basically, if you look at the engine block, the way this is sandwiched together, it has bolts that come from here all the way to the front. Now, when you have a lot of power going through these things tend to kind of twist, and that's how you munch internal components. And also, if you're running very high boost pressures in them, they have a tendency to detonate if you're not really careful with the tune and the timing and the fueling. So that's kind of where that comes from, is people just being a little bit careless in their builds and just not necessarily taking into account that this is a different engine than a normal piston engine. You can't treat them the same.
Yeah, so what's really cool about rotaries, for if you guys who don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you're building these, it's not called like building an engine, you're stacking an engine. So like Irvin was talking about with those super long bolts that go all the way through, you put a plate, and then you put a rotor, and then you put a housing, and then you put a bolt, and you put a plate and a rotor and a housing, and you stack it like you're stacking a sandwich.
It's 100% just a little metal sandwich.
And then you also dress it with, what'd you do, Vaseline?
Yeah, actually. So the Vaseline is a really big thing in rotary builds, because when you're putting all of the internal like rotating assembly together, all of the seals that go into the rotor have to be able to stick to that rotor, because you're basically dropping the rotor in, and there's seals on the bottom that will fall out if you don't have anything. So you can take a nice big goop of Vaseline, cover the bottom of the rotor with all the seals in there so that they'll stay in when you put them into the housings. So yeah, I have tubs of Vaseline in my toolbox ready at any given
for that exact reason.
Yeah. Right here we can actually show you guys what it looks like on the inside of one of those
Factory
guys.
fresh.
That's, yeah, factory from Mazda, Turbo 2. Those are quite expensive and imported straight from Japan, as you
Of course,
can see.
overnight as well.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so this is one of the housings, and then inside here sits the rotor, and then you put a plate, and then a housing, and a rotor, and a plate, and then through these holes? These holes?
These are the bolt holes.
These are the bolt holes, and then the bolts go all the way through.
Yeah.
So the size of your engine is determined by how long those bolts are. So if you get really long bolts, which if you guys have watched any Rob Dahm or people who have built rotary engines bigger than this, those bolts just get longer, and then you use the same stuff.
It gets a little more complicated than that. So on something like a 3-rotor, instead of having just longer bolts, the way the 3 rotors work is we basically have a 2-rotor and then a 1-rotor. So we'll have one fat plate that will have bolts coming in from both sides. So we'll have a housing on this side that's bolted into that, and 2 housings on this side that's bolted in from that. Yeah, so it's not necessarily just longer bolts, but when you get into 4-rotor and stuff like that, you do have to get longer bolts for them.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about your specific engine. So one thing that's very apparent is the paint job, the Bumblebee paint job. If you've seen a 13B, it always alternates the paint job because you can.
You gotta do it. There's some people that just spray the whole engine, but those people are felons and should be arrested.
So what's super cool is when Irvin was painting this, there's a couple like little painting masking tricks, which I didn't know, which is one when you masked off the surfaces you didn't want painted, you used a mallet on the sharp edges to actually break the tape as opposed to cutting the tape with like a razor blade, and it leaves a much cleaner edge and it's way quicker.
Yep.
And then we also have a bunch of earplugs laying around the shop, and all of those got shoved in the tiny little holes that have threads. So stuff like that is super interesting for when you're getting into stuff like this where you're painting your engine or you're doing stuff like that. You can get a little bit creative. There's ways to do this stuff that, I don't know, you guys might not know about, but that's one way that this thing was masked.
Yeah, it makes the whole masking process a lot easier because you can just lay a bunch of tape down and then just hammer it out and it all just comes off. You don't have to like sit there with a little knife and worry about like nicking your surface or anything like that. It makes it super nice and easy.
Yeah, so basically everything that's done to this car, by the way, Irvin pretty much has a video on every single thing. And something that I love that Irvin has a way more in-depth video on is this whole booster and brake assembly here. So if you've got an eye for FC parts, you'll notice that's not an FC part.
Nope.
So why don't you tell us about this whole brake system that you've developed, essentially?
I didn't develop it. This was actually something that I found in the forums, but it's actually a complete brake assembly out of a Subaru Legacy. And it's super nice because it just bolts in. You have to shorten the push rod inside the car a little bit, but other than that, it gives you a brand new 2-stage booster with a perfect master cylinder that's the perfect size for either the 4-pot turbo brakes that you get on this or any big brake kit that you could put on it, which mine, when I got it, already came with the 4-pot brakes on it. So that's super nice. Honestly, the brake pedal before felt super garbage because they didn't actually switch the master cylinder to something that would fit the 4-piston brakes better. So it never felt right. So I think that with this setup, we're going to have a lot better brake feel, and we're actually going to have a booster that we can replace and won't even need to replace because at this point it's not leaking. My other one was just completely full of brake fluid and it was not great, just completely rusted out. So now we don't have that.
Yeah, and then something else that's super, super cool, which is one of my favorite parts of everything you've done so far, is the custom brake lines. So all of these brake lines that you see in the engine bay here, Irvin bent and flared and what else?
Yeah, so that was actually probably one of the closest times that I've ever reached to insanity. Building these brake lines was a mission. So I started out with welding wire that I basically bent to get into the rough shape that I wanted.
Yeah, and so you mapped it all out first.
Yeah, just with something cheap so that I didn't have to waste brake line on it. Then I started hitting some brake line with some benders, and I got a flare kit. I had to go through like 3 different flare kits just because I could not find one that would make the flare and make it not leak, because like all of the normal ones where you like screw in, for some reason they just aren't very accurate, and you always get it like a little off center, and when it is off center it just leaks like crazy.
Aren't brake lines technically called like double flared lines or something?
Yeah. So the main thing that we're doing is we're doing 2 flare operations on them, on every single one. So the first one, you kind of squeeze the tube and it bubbles out, so that's called a bubble flare. That in some cases is good to hold pressure, but not enough for a braking system, so we always do double flares on them. The second operation, we take like a triangular bit that goes inside of that and just caves it in, so that gives it a good amount of bite and sealing surface to be able to actually hold the type of pressures that you can get out of a braking system.
Yeah. So that's good for the braking system, the engine, and then the main star of the entire show. So this is why this car has taken absolutely forever, for a good reason, a very good reason.
Yes.
And this right here is one of the pieces of that. So this is part of, is this technically the breakout box essentially? This piece here?
It's a breakout box and a fuse box, fuse and relay breakout box, I'd say.
So what Irvin's doing is he's completely developing, this time I can say developing, you are like R&D'ing an entire new engine harness, fuse box, battery location, and basically eliminating everything you don't need on these cars, because these came with a lot of extra circuits and empty relay spots and empty fuse spots. Like every car that's not like the top tier, there's just empty stuff.
Not only that, but if we look in the engine bay right now, we can see how little stuff there is in it right now. This is not the case in basically any FC that you will see on the market or in any pictures or anything like that. The thing that sucks about these things is that the wiring, the way that they did it, is not necessarily done in a very smart way. It was in 1987. Like, I don't necessarily fault them for it. It was not engineered very well, especially to today's car standards. So what we had in here were 2 engine harnesses, or 2 engine bay harnesses, one that would come through that hole and it would come all the way over here to a fuse box right here, and then we'd have another one that'd come through this hole all the way over here to the engine and control the engine stuff. Now the issue was that none of the concerns were really separated. So you had an engine harness that ran the engine, but it also had stuff for the headlights and the washer tank and all that kind of stuff. Then you had a body harness that would also go into the engine and would also do headlights and would also do the entire dash. The body harness on this thing is actually also the dash harness, so you can't just disconnect that harness. Getting that harness out was the worst thing I've ever done in my life. I had to pull the entire dash out, pull all of the AC stuff out, and then behind that was that harness, and then I could finally pull it out, and I ended up just cutting this section that comes into the engine bay completely off, because I don't ever want to do that again, so I'm just going to have it there in a connector that's going to be hidden, so you'll never be able to see it.
Okay, let's start showing them some stuff. I think we've done enough talking. So that's kind of the idea behind everything that's going on here. We're making it as simple as possible, as clean as possible, and let's just show stuff. So this is one of the coolest pieces, because this was all done in one print, and this is like a 90-degree fuse breakout box. So all the connectors can kind of come in from one side, and then fuses and relays can sit on top on the other side, and this doesn't block a lot of the radiator. So this is a super cool piece. And then over here we have more pieces to the giant puzzle that is this fuse box and entire wiring system. So this guy is the original fuse block for the RX7, and as you can see, which Irvin talks about a lot in all of his videos, is that they use the giant size fuses, which have been since transformed into much smaller fuses. So this is the redesigned fuse box. We have the relays here, the fuses here. Why don't you get more into that depth on the whole process of making this?
Okay, so this was all designed and 3D printed by me. As you guys can see, we're using actual OEM elements. These came out of fuse boxes that came in a lot of Toyota stuff. In this case specifically, it's a lot of Toyota Tundra fuse boxes. They're super nice because they're modular. We have all of these different little parts that we can just make a design for a housing that just like clips in, and then you can modify this fuse box to have as much or as little functionality as you want. As you can see, this is a little fuse brick that actually has as many fuses as this giant piece right here. So we're eliminating this entire thing and just moving to this. Where on the rest of these, we have a bunch of different relays. We've got 3 or 5-pin relays, 4-pin relays, and a bunch of other 4-pin relays. This is going to be nice because we're going to be able to hide the giant relays that we had just sitting in the engine bay in the car instead of having them out and visible. We'll have them in a nice box where they can be nice and weather sealed and easily replaceable.
So again, like Irvin already talked about, all of these are little modules that pop out. So what's really cool is that like once you get the external diameters of this module right here, you can essentially make any fuse box design that you want. You can put this over here, you can put this over here, and you just do a print, and then all of these guys should pop in. So if you need to do a fuse box that like wraps around a corner, you could just print something that wraps around a corner and then pop in all of your modules. So what's really cool is that like when Irvin does this to every other single one of his cars that I know he will do it to, he can just use these exact same files and then route it differently. So that's it for the fuse box portion, or at least where the relays and fuses are held. And then here we have the wiring harness. So, well, what's the name of this wire again? This is really interesting wire.
So this is called Tefsel wiring. This is a very specific type of wire that is mil-spec is what we'll call it. Basically, instead of being like a normal like silicone or different type of plastic on this is actually Teflon coated. So that means that each one of these wires has a very, very, very thin insulator coating, but it's a lot stronger than normal wires. So that means that these wires have a lot smaller of a diameter, so they take up less space, they're lighter, and they can still handle the same amount of power as a wire that would look a lot bigger if it was just cheap, normal hookup wire.
And as you guys can see, because Irvin is a maniac, every single wire is the same color. They're all white.
Yep.
So that's how you know somebody knows their wiring system when like there's just all one color wire. Yes. Nobody else is going to be able to work on this because they'll need to just like resistance test both sides of the wire
so it's
to know where it's going.
It's actually going to be very easy to work on this thing because as I've been building this, I have all of the documentation that I need. I have pinouts of everything that I'm doing. I've got complete like drawings of all the different wiring harnesses. Every single thing is laid out on my computer exactly the way that it's going to be. So realistically, like I'm going to be able to just give somebody a wiring harness and they'd be able to, or a wiring diagram, and they'd be able to figure out anything on my car because I'm building that all myself.
So if you guys have noticed the theme, this build here is done like a professional would build a race car in a sense, where it's all done like, it's first done on the computer. Like, you know, the measure twice, cut once. Irvin designs it on CAD first, 3D prints to test mock it up, then test mocks it up in the car before like anything is touched, before any brackets or anything is cut in this car. It's all been done in CAD. It's all been done online, and I'm sure I put some of the wiring diagrams on the computer, but it's not like, oh, I hope this wire is this long. Everything's been done. So like when stuff goes into this car, obviously there's been a bunch of trial and error, which he doesn't put as much in the videos as I think he should, but there is version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4. And so when something finally goes into this car, it just kind of plops in and it looks perfect. But there's so many iterations that you guys don't see if you follow Irvin's channel, which is why we're doing this to showcase. Because you guys have seen the fuse box if you watch his stuff. But what you haven't seen is like 16 other fuse boxes that are sitting in this bin. You guys saw that little 90-degree bracket at the front. Here is all of the other brackets and fuse boxes.
This isn't all of them. This is some of them.
So, yeah, it's just insane how much like thought goes into every single piece. Like you look at it and you're like, oh, that's cool. You just like made it do this, so it's like simple and it doesn't block the radiator. But you didn't see all of those versions that came to that final version.
It has been months of my life in the making, but the nice thing is that at the end of it, not only will I have a functioning car, but I'll have a car that will be easy to work on because I have all the documentation that I need. So if anything ever goes wrong, I'll be able to just go to my actual wiring diagrams that I've been making for everything along the way on the computer, and actually be able to reference all of that stuff with pin diagrams and everything like that. It won't be like a normal Mazda RX-7 where you have to look through Mazda's diagrams that just don't make sense and don't even have the same stuff.
The manual that has all of the pin outputs. Okay, let's show more stuff. Let's talk about the battery relocation and the very, very cool battery. So these guys are anti-gravity. Do you have it in here?
I do not have it in here. It's in the Ferrari.
Oh no. First world problems.
I know, right?
So we don't have the battery with us, but the battery that goes in there is an anti-gravity battery, which we actually got to see them at SEMA.
Yep.
And these things are incredible. You lift it up and it feels like you're holding a hollow box. You know, like when you get an Amazon package and it comes in this giant box and like you lift it up and there's like nothing in there? That is what these batteries are. And what's super, super cool is that these batteries have a restart function in them, which is, okay, so it's the size of this and weighs what, like a couple pounds?
It is 5 pounds. It is 5 pounds for 880 cold cranking amps, which is insane. Normally you would need like a 45 pound battery to get that kind of output. It's super nice. It's lithium ion, so it's a lot more powerful, a lot more power dense, so you don't necessarily need as much weight to be able to pull that kind of power. Like Ben was saying, it does have that restart feature. It basically has a smart controller inside of it to see when the voltage of it is getting like kind of low, so it'll actually shut itself off to prevent any further draining, but it'll still leave enough reserve capacity in the tank to be able to actually start your car again. So then once it's started, the alternator will kick in and start charging it up again. You won't have to worry about it. They're super nice. Honestly, they're crazy batteries. That little 5 pound battery can start the massive V8 in that Ferrari, no problem, which was a huge issue with the old battery that I had in it. But that's actually meant to go in the RX-7. You can see we have custom brackets that
Okay, so these brackets, if you guys didn't see where you just pulled them out from, are sitting in these, you always call them like grocery tubs.
They're bins, yeah.
So these are small little bins in the back of the RX-7, which are to hold your stuff. But what Irvin has done in here is he's designed a battery relocation like kit almost. That you have all these components, and so this is the hold down, right?
Yes.
This is the tray.
Yep.
So this is actually, you can kind of see more of the dimensions of the battery. This thing is super, super small. And then it all sits on a piece of sheet metal that's been cut in there and folded to secure itself nicely into the bin.
All of that stuff is also CAD designed, and this has all been sent out to Send Cut Send so that they can just cut the stuff for me, and then I just bend it, get it to where I need it, and it all works. It's super nice to be able to just like design a part, send out a file to get it like cut, and then in a few days you have a functional piece of your car,
which is absolutely awesome. Let's talk about the wiring routing. So obviously the battery's back here inside the cabin, which is not normally.
No,
and
never.
Then where is this harness routing?
Okay, so harness is going to be going through right in this little section.
Okay.
Completely hidden. Then we will have interfaces to both the dash harness in here and the body harness that will go out this way.
So you'll have a junction block kind of down by your left foot that has breakouts to go to the engine and then breakouts to go to the dash.
The engine's actually going to be on the other side.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to have the breakout to the engine harness from here.
Yeah.
Then body harness and then dash harness. Main thing that I'm trying to do is separate all those concerns so that if I have an issue with the engine harness, I only have to pull the engine harness. If I have something with the body harness, I only have to touch that. The whole thing that Mazda had going on was just everything was mixed together. So if you wanted to just pull your engine, like you had to do a bunch of stuff that I felt was unnecessary, and I didn't ever want to do that again. So the whole point of this thing is that by the end of it, we're going to have probably 2 connectors going right about here, and they will just be firewall connectors, so you can just unplug them from there and the entire engine will be able to come out.
Which is awesome. Do you have any connectors with you? So Irvin's a big connector guy, which I don't, if you guys didn't know, those exist. And so what he has is like a Pokemon collection of different motorsport connectors and Deutsch connectors and basically anything to disconnect 2 wires. So
if you ever want to see what $1,000 in electrical connectors looks like, That's pretty close. No, this is, let's see, that's probably $500 actually. But these ones are basically just 19 pin connectors that I can go ahead and unplug just like that. This is going to be going into my fuse box, so this is actually going to be what's exposed from the fuse box. So if I ever need to pull my main harness from it, it's as simple as that. This is like Tony Stark putting in the arc reactor.
Okay, so Irvin has busted out some of his wiring nerd stuff to give you guys a better showcase. So this is what we were talking about with the sort of breakout fuse box. So all of these are the relays, and then all of these are the fuses, and this populates. So this is all engine stuff, right?
No, this is actually only body stuff. So we have a fan relay. We're gonna have headlight, dimmer. Let's see, what else we got? Retractors. We've got horns. We've got fog lights. I don't remember what the last one's for off the top of my head. Oh, high beams. But then all the fuses for all that stuff go right there. We've got this main connector breakout that, if we get these wires out of the way, just slides in to here, and then all of our connectors will be just going straight into there. We'll have the main harness going into here with our high amperage connector on the side. I haven't drilled that hole yet.
Yeah.
But then we will have 2 for the body harness, 1 for the bumper harness, and 1 for the fans.
Okay, so why don't we go over some more of the connectors specifically. So all of these connectors are in here, all Deutsch connectors, right?
Yes.
And then,
so actually technically all of these connectors are Deutsch connectors.
okay.
Even these guys, these are just Deutsch Autosport connectors. They're just a line of Deutsch connectors, but they're all made by the same company. These are Deutsch DT connectors that are good for about 13 amps per terminal. And then these are DTP connectors, which are good for a good amount more. I don't necessarily remember the spec off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm. And then these are the big boys, which I'm sure you guys have been seeing a couple of stills, but these are the motorsport connectors, which are super cool because you can get like a super dense pin array here. And then these are also what you would put like, you would put this like in between like something, right? So this would be like so the firewall or something would be in between here, or
yeah,
a bumper, or...
The nice thing about these guys is that they make flanged ones. So we can actually just stick this guy inside. Let's see if it'll fucking fit. Oh, I'm using the Sorio on this part. And then we just gotta stick that guy through. So that is what that's gonna look like. We'll be able to plug our connector in, just like that.
So Irvin's basically built his own like Lego set of electrical stuff here.
Yeah, the whole point of this entire build is to make it easy to work on. And I know that you guys are going to joke around about, oh, it's a rotary, you're going to have to rebuild it all the time. That is part of it, but also once I do put power into this thing, I'm going to have to be pulling that engine all the time. If I'm going to want to like maintenance anything like that, I don't want to do that in the car. So I wanted to make everything basically as easy as I can to work on. I also do have some plans on maybe some swaps in the future, but we'll leave that somewhat secretive.
2 letters. Leave it in the comments, guys. I'm sure you all know what it is.
Yeah, I wouldn't ever say that. if I ever say a 2-letter word out of my mouth, then somebody has to slap me in the face because I've definitely gone crazy. No, this thing will never get a V8. Never get any sort of V8. Unless it's a flat plane crank. No LSs. LSs belong in the junkyard. Keep them there.
So... we got all of, oh, we didn't really showcase this one. This one's pretty neat.
So these are Amphenol power connectors. Basically, we have very large wire capabilities. This one I think is a 4-gauge wire. I also have some 2-gauge wires for the main starter wire that's going to be coming through the firewall. As you can see, they're just quick connects. So this gets crimped onto the end of the wire, and then we can just go ahead and clip that into place. And that is a good amount of amperage. That's just quick connect. You don't have to like unbolt anything. On this side is what you would normally have. And this just takes too much time.
Yeah, so this stuff on either end here just gets crimped a technically small gauge wire with a big gauge wire.
Yeah.
And then you can just quick disconnect a very high amperage wire instead of like unbolting a battery terminal or whatnot.
This will actually be going onto the end of the harness that I have here. This will be that wire going into there.
Yep. Oh, we didn't even talk about this tape. This tape is pretty cool.
Yeah, Kapton tape. So that tape is very specific, quite expensive, but this is what it looks like. It's super nice because it is heat resistant and doesn't actually leave like a sticky residue like normal electrical tape would.
It's like NASA tape right here.
But it is also very thin. This stuff is like stupid thin and stupid strong. But this makes sure that all of the harnessing that goes on inside of here doesn't necessarily transfer to the outside, which normally if you have like a thick amount of tape, you will actually be able to see that outside through the heat shrink. Is not something that you want. So we've got both Kapton tape. You can see this yellow cord right here. This stuff is actually Kevlar lacing that we put into place to make sure that the harness stays nice and together so that we can have just an exposed harness like this and don't have to worry about it unraveling.
So we kind of briefly went over the harness earlier, to be honest with you guys. This thing has gotten so much love. So what's really cool is that these wires are all, is it concentric twisted? Is the term for it. And you have a video where you just briefly show a bunch of different wire layouts, but didn't really delve too much into them. So he's come to this solution, which is your large like power wire in the center with all of your wires concentrically twisted around it. But you had a couple other designs for these wires. So do you want to go over like what else had gone into this harness before we came to this one right here? So
those other wire designs were actually never for this harness. The main thing is that we have to worry about the density of the wires inside. So every layer of this harness has to have like a certain amount of wires to make sure that it stays nice and tight and that it is nice and flexible. That's the nice thing about concentric twisted harnesses, is that at the end of the day, these things can bend all the way like this, like crazy amounts, and you can see none of these wires have any like specific amounts of stress on them because they're all twisted in a way where they just share the load, and like any bend is not going to actually like crimp any of those wires.
So that's actually, to get more into why it's done like this, I know like steel cables that hold up bridges are concentrically twisted so that when the wire flexes, if you know math, the outside radius is going to be longer than the inside, or larger, I guess. So when they're twisted like this, you don't end up with the outside wires bending and then the inside wires kind of contracting. So when it's bent like this, all the wires are being stretched or strained the same amount.
Exactly.
Which is pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah, this harness is sick.
So this one, not only is this like super cool on the inside right now, we've also got a lot of really cool stuff like these heat shrink boots. As you can see, most of the connectors that I'm using have these sections that basically are like little barbed sections. So this is gonna, in the end, be a completely waterproof harness. It's gonna be fully booted up.
So there's gonna be a snorkel right here, guys, and Irvin's gonna drive into the lake.
I don't know about all that, but we also have epoxy for all of the connections on the harness, so that anytime that this harness is like split off into different sections, we're going to put this epoxy in there to make sure that it's completely waterproof, that no moisture, no weather, no anything can get into it. And it's going to be completely overkill for this car. You do not need to do this to any of your...
I don't know if it's overkill, because I've heard stories about these with electrical gremlins due to corroded terminals and corroded electronics and this that will just like, you'll be chasing stuff forever.
So the issue with that is not only that kind of stuff, but we can see the old connectors that they had. The weatherproofing that they had on these guys were like, let's just put a sock over a non-weather sealed connector and then that'll be fine.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of that kind of stuff comes from. This is a relay.
Yeah,
this is one
huge.
relay.
It's like a cowbell.
It's gigantic. Like this is ridiculous, and it's not even carrying like stupid amounts of amperage or anything like that. Like I've minimized this relay to something about this big in my car now, so this doesn't have to just be open in my engine bay. But yeah, this is. We're trying to get rid of as many electrical gremlins as we can, and by doing that, we are, you know, going way overboard.
Doing
on
all
everything.
of this, pretty much.
Yeah, it's a little ridiculous, but it's fun. It's gonna be cool.
And what's really cool is that like this looks really daunting, and if I hadn't been along with Irvin on this journey where he basically explains every single thing he's done to this car for the past 2 years, it might seem that way, but he's got videos on everything here. So if you guys are actually like interested in, say, even just like deleting that big relay and you like want a smaller relay in your car, or if you want to relocate stuff, Irvin's got videos talking about all of these different products he used, all of the different connector styles he's used. So if you guys want to, like, you don't have to do all of this, but like if you just want to do a little bit, if you just want to try something, he's got some really great tutorials on that.
I like to show you guys the process and like the main ideas of what I'm doing so that you guys can take those ideas and implement them in your own way, so you don't actually have to follow exactly what I'm doing, but like you'd be able to learn how to like crimp your own wires, or, you know, like make your own harness if you wanted to, or like all of those type of techniques that go into doing stuff like this without necessarily just copying everything that I'm doing, because you don't have to. I'm stupid. I shouldn't be doing this. But it's fun.
Okay, oh, the rear ends. Do we want to see if we can stick a light under there? Because you have, stuff has been done underneath the car, which you guys can't see. Do we have a light?
We have a light.
Okay, I believe you.
We have a light.
Do we see any lights? Ah, a light.
Make a light. So, just like everything else in this car, the rear end has been completely gone through.
So let's see if we can get under here and show you guys some stuff. So
See, the whole subframe has been taken out, painted, and all of the gross old bushings and stuff have been replaced by new Powered by Max parts.
it's so cool under here. It's like such a sleeper build. Because
Yeah.
like everything under here looks brand new. Because we have the BC coilovers, and then the whole subframe is like you can't get this paint job without taking it out.
Absolutely not.
That's really nice. So all new bushings, everything's been painted. Pretty much just like a full refresh, right?
Yep.
Was anything back here bent? Because I know you straightened out stuff in the front.
Yeah, oh yeah.
but
So
if you look,
Nope.
back under.
this crossbar right here,
Okay.
that actually got completely bent, and that was it was like a horseshoe. It wasn't that bad, but it was like it was pretty bent, and so I had to take that out and go find one in a junkyard, and luckily I was able to.
You found an FC RX7 in a junkyard?
Yes, sir.
What?
Yes, sir.
Oh.
Yes, sad day, but you know, it was in worse condition than mine was, even after the crash.
So the rear subframe has been replaced, and then you also straightened out stuff in the front. Why don't we
Go in front and talk about that for just a second, because that was pretty interesting. Because you did a pretty, well, I wouldn't say jank frame straightening solution, but
that's pretty normal stuff in like body shops, you know.
so I mean, I can't even tell. One of these frame rails was crinkled.
Is that one
So
passenger side?
this frame rail over here was crinkled to the point where this subframe wouldn't even line up properly, right?
Yes, and not to mention, if we look at this tire, this used to have positive camber also, so it was, the bottom of it was actually like sitting in, so it looked really stupid. Now, basically when I had the engine out, I had a big hydraulic, basically like a bottle jack that I used to push on that frame rail so that I could, you know, like bring it back to where it needed to be. And I got measurements from another FCRX7 to make sure that everything was perfect. And at this point, we're exactly where we need to be. The camber's perfect. The straightness of that frame rail is perfect.
Yeah.
It's a brand new subframe, so we don't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. And it just fit like it normally should.
Beautiful. These motor mounts are pretty sick, and then these are new bushings as well. Are these harder?
So those are poly mounts, actually. The OE mounts are garbage. I've gone through 4 sets of them in the time that I drove this car, just because those are the only 2 mounts that hold this engine in. So any torque that gets applied to the engine gets applied to the engine in like a twisting fashion.
That's wild. So that red bushing down there in the corner and that red bushing over there, which you can see a lot better, are the only things supporting the engine, essentially.
And with the stock mounts, it's actually even worse, because with these mounts, these are through-hole engine mounts, which means that we have a bolt that goes all the way through. We have the bushings to make sure that it kind of like softens the vibrations a little bit. On the factory mounts, they're actually, they've got like a top plate with a bolt, a bottom plate with a bolt, and then inside is just rubber. There's nothing holding those 2 plates together, because it eliminates a lot of vibrations. However, that also means that you can completely separate that top plate from the rubber, and that's what ended up happening on this driver's side mount like 4 times on this thing. It would just separate, and then you'd get the engine just moving side to side like crazy, and it was annoying to drive, because if you had it in first gear and you just like kind of like half throttled it, the whole car would just go gung, 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 and you just feel the engine going like this.
So it's these 2 mounts, and then is the next mount technically like the transmission. And a cross member?
Transmission cross member is the only other mount.
Wow, that's wild that you can just have 2. And also another thing is, if you guys haven't seen one of these without everything else in the engine, look how far back this engine and how small it is relative to the engine bay. You could fit
almost a mid-engine.
It's practically, it's insane how much room you have over here. The engine takes up like less than half, and it's almost all behind the strut towers.
Yep.
So I think we might have already mentioned it, but you're gonna do stuff here, right?
We haven't mentioned it,
Oh,
but
okay.
so at this point, this thing is going to stay somewhat stock. I have a Koyrad aluminum racing radiator that's going to be going into this thing.
That's the radiator for this?
The box, the big one.
Oh, that's a sick radiator.
No, that's an intercooler. That's a V-mount
I was
intercooler.
like, Irvin pointed over here, and I looked at this. I was like, "Wow, dude, that's insane."
Yeah, I mean, look at the inlet for that. That is definitely
That's like
insane.
a 5-inch inlet.
Yeah.
I was like, "Dude,
That's
I've
a little
never
rich.
seen something like that."
That's
Okay.
a little rich for my taste. Anyways, we're going to be putting a Koyrad aluminum racing radiator in this thing. These things are already kind of V-mounted. Not necessarily V-mounted because it doesn't have an intercooler. But we can see how much of an angle right here. These are the mounts for the radiator.
So if you don't even know what everyone's talking about, when he's talking about a V-mount setup, is you have your radiator, and then is V-mount only technically if you also have an intercooler?
Yes.
So you would have your radiator come down this way, right?
It's usually the opposite. Just usually an intercooler on top,
So-
radiator on the bottom.
Okay, so radiator would come down here.
No.
Intercooler would come down
There
here.
you go.
Ah, got it. And then radiator would come up like here.
No.
This way?
Okay.
Here, you explain this. I don't know what I'm talking about.
So V-mount is basically, we have 2 different cooling components on a normal turbocharged car. We have the intercooler, which cools the charge air going into the engine, and then we have the radiator, which cools all the water that cools the engine. So the main thing is that on normal cars, we have front-mounted intercoolers and or radiators. So we have, let's say, a cooling component that comes down and is just straight like this. Now that works well, except for we have to think about the kind of layout of this car. As you can see, it's a very short car at the front end, but it's very long, which means that if we just had a radiator that was this tall, we couldn't necessarily fit anything that big, and honestly for a rotary engine, you'd never be able to cool it with a radiator that big. So we have to find a way to make those radiators bigger. Now the way that we do that is we angle them, so we can actually fit in quite a taller radiator if we just sit it in at an angle. Now
Yeah, this is your hypotenuse, right?
Exactly.
being larger than whatever the other 2 angles are called.
Yep. You want your C-squared to be your radiator. So what people will actually do, instead of putting front mount intercoolers and leaving the normal radiators in this, since we have so much room between the engine bay and any of the metal parts in the front, we can actually do what's called a V-mount, which means that you're mounting the intercooler and the radiator at a V, so they suck in air from the front.
So air's coming this way, guys.
Air's coming this way. and then we're baby sharking it into
do.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
But basically, we'd have an intercooler right here, sucking in air, and then normally you're going to want a good amount of venting on your hood to be able to get all of that air to escape out through the hood. And then you'll have a radiator on the bottom, scooping air like this, and all of that air will be forced through the radiator and down out through the bottom, which has to be ducted also.
That was a much better explanation than mine.
Yeah, I mean,
but my car's N8, that's my excuse. I don't even know what any of this is.
It's true. I've seen a lot of V-mount cars. But yeah, that's basically what a V-mount is. They're super cool, super awesome. Kind of hard to set up if there aren't kits for your car already, but that's going to be the plan on some of my projects. I can't necessarily say this car, but it's going to be similar to this car.
So that's what all of this real estate is going towards, is going to be cooling air and to be cooling water.
Yes.
Which is super cool. And then obviously on this side, this side's headers, right? You're going to have exhaust on this side?
It's both, actually.
Oh.
So the rotary engines are kind of funny. We have both our intake ports, which are up here, and our exhaust ports on the same side.
Okay.
Now, the way that this is working is that we're sucking air into the housing right here. Up here, we're pushing it towards this side. We're squeezing it, right? Once it gets to this side,
That's your suck squeeze.
we get to our spark plugs. We've got 2 spark plugs per hole.
That's your bang.
Yeah, so we've got our trailing and leading spark plugs. And so those guys will fire and push the rotor down.
Yep.
Which will then push the exhaust out through these big exhaust holes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So this also has 4 spark plugs, right?
Yep.
Which is pretty weird because you only have 2 rotors, but you know, you need...
It's not that weird. Nissan had some dual spark plug per cylinder cars. The S12, you know, C18D was 2 spark plugs per cylinder. I mean, it's a lot cooler when it's a rotary, but
Yeah, just a little bit.
yeah.
Awesome.
So,
are you doing anything to this transmission for this? I don't think I've ever even talked to you about that. Are you like, what's going on?
At this point, I have a factory transmission, which is garbage, and it's not going to be what ends up staying in this thing, but I'm not actually planning on putting any power through this thing. At this point, this is a stock rebuild because I didn't necessarily want to add in... No, it is stock. Completely.
I mean like stock.
No, I mean, the engine rebuild is pretty stock. I mean, it does have S5 rotors, which are lighter than the rotors that originally came with this thing, so I should be able to hit a slightly higher red line with them. But other than that, really, I did nothing to add any power to this engine. I didn't port it. I didn't add boost. I'm not going to add boost. This thing is going to be a factory RX7 is the goal, to make this thing drive like a factory RX7.
I can already imagine there's going to be, if anybody decides to comment, a bunch of kids saying, why would you put all this work into a car to make stock power?
So that's the thing, is that I understand why you guys would think that. Here's the thing. I didn't want to have the first time that I built a rotary engine be clouded by trying to put all this crazy stuff into it, and then at the end of it be left with something that's subpar because I messed something up along the way. Because if I put a lot more money and turboed this thing or did all that kind of stuff, and then I ended up blowing the engine on it, then
It's all for nothing.
Yeah, it's all for nothing, and then I'm gonna have to do it again, and then I'm not gonna be happy about it. This way, I can make sure that it's basically a proof of concept, that I can build a rotary engine that isn't gonna blow up by itself. I can run it stock the way that it was running before, and that I know that I can rebuild a rotary engine that will function. Then, the nice part is that the way that I'm building the rest of this car means that if I wanted to build a turbo engine on the side and throw it into here, it would be 2 connectors, pull this engine out, plug the new one in.
And what's super cool is that, like, since you've designed your entire wiring harness and you know this car in and out, it would be like as simple as just adding some stuff. It wouldn't be like...
It wouldn't even be adding stuff. This thing is going to get full fuel system upgrades. This thing is going to get a full standalone ECU. I want to get to the point where I can tune a factory Mazda rotary engine and everything, just so that I know how everything kind of works without the stress of having it be boosted, because that adds on so many more layers of having to be careful with stuff. So if I can tune this thing and get that all, like, make sure that I have practice doing that. So then, realistically, all I'll have to do, swap out those 2 connectors, which will already be pinned out and ready for a turbo engine, except for it's going to be running NA for now. So literally all I have to do is pull this one out, put a new one in, you're done. Just throw a tune on it, you're done.
Simple as that.
Yep.
Oh, the ECU. This is going to be running a standalone, right? Right off the rip. So it's going to
yes.
Right. Yeah. So it's like a stock engine, like you said, and it's going to be running a standalone, which is pretty interesting. Why don't you talk about this standalone and like why you're choosing to do this?
So yeah, like I said, I'm going to be putting a Haltech in it. The main thing is that tuning rotaries is very difficult. It's not necessarily any more difficult than a piston engine, but it is a very different type of thing. You have to pay attention to a lot of other stuff that you wouldn't normally have to do on a piston engine. You have to make sure that this thing does not knock at all. Where a piston engine could take a few like little knocks here and there and not necessarily worry about it. On this thing, if this thing pre-detonates, you're losing your engine. So there's a lot of stress that goes into tuning that. So that's why I wanted to make sure that when I am tuning my first rotary engine, it's going to be a stock rotary engine with stock power, and I'm not going to be pushing anything too hard. So for that reason, I'm running standalone, which is going to be nice because that's also going to tie into a lot of the stuff that I'm doing on the interior. At this point, none of that stuff is done because I haven't even gotten to the point where I can even start thinking about that. But once this thing is running, we're going to be running full custom gauges. I do plan, if you can see right in here, normally we have a spot for a little cluster of warning lights right here. Now that gives you some information in the form of like a check engine light or like a coolant temp light or something like that. It's stupid. Honestly, it's stupid. They don't work. It's just dumb. So I'm going to be replacing that with a very small little screen that's going to be configurable with my ECU to display any like gauges that people would normally put up here or anything like that. All of that is going to be right here, and I'm going to be able to just select what data I want to be showed, and it's going to show up right there.
That really reminds me of something I've seen before in another car. Well, I wonder where you got that inspiration from.
Yeah. MFDs, baby. That's kind of exactly where I got the inspiration from it. So, I guess we can...
So this is just one of the Nissans that are sitting in here.
Yeah, it's just a shitty old Nissan, you know.
Yeah. It's like, what is this, Altima? Or what was
Something
this thing?
I don't remember.
But this thing, this was like one of the... This was one of the add-ons for this thing. You could get these with the digital display here, with show the GPS and all that kind of stuff. But that's essentially what's going to be going in this thing over here.
Yeah, it's a smaller version. I'm not going to actually make anything that sticks out of the dash like that.
Yeah.
But it is going to basically have all that same data so that I don't have to run gauges in this thing. My main thing with my cars is that I want them to function like crazy race cars. I don't want them to feel like crazy race cars. That's the same way that I want my IS to be. I like the fact that it is just a car that I can get in and enjoy and not have to be like, oh, what are my AFRs at and all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. If I need that data, it'll be there. But if I don't, the computer's going to be taking care of all of that stuff. It's not like I can even do anything in the moment anyways. So I just want to get in and drive it and forget that it is a crazy modified car. That's kind of the point of this build.
That is the game plan. So, I mean, I think for right now, we've gone over a lot.
A lot.
Not everything, to be honest, but like a lot.
That is
now,
scraping the surface.
This thing is getting a bunch of parts pretty soon. There's like we already showed you, there's side skirts coming for this. Like, I mean, the whole body is getting some love for sure. We'll probably end up doing an update video on this thing if you guys would like. I mean, I know I would like, so I'm gonna film one. You guys don't have to watch it if you don't want to. But this thing is, I don't want to say done soon, but like a lot has been done. Yeah. There's still a lot more to do, but once the wiring harness is done and once the fuse box gets more done, the fuse box is done, right?
The fuse box is done. I just have to build the harnesses.
This thing is close. This thing is close. I could feel it. It's still on dollies, and there's still like nothing attached to the engine.
It doesn't have to be on dollies.
There's no wires in the thing, but like it's close.
I mean, the wiring is not necessarily going to look far from that. Like once the intake and everything on, the whole goal of this thing is that you're not really going to.
Look at this now, where it can't run, and then we'll watch the next part. We'll have the part up here, where it's running and it looks just like how it does now. That's the idea, at least.
Yep. Pretty close. Pretty close.
Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it to the end, you're a trooper. That's insane. Obviously, all of Irvin's stuff will be linked down in the description. He does Instagram, he does TikTok, he does YouTube. If you want like short little snippets of like stuff, he goes over like the connectors more in depth. That stuff will be on TikTok. And then if you want like how these brake lines were made or how the booster fit or the exact booster he used, that stuff will all be on his YouTube channel. Okay. Thank you guys so much for watching once again. Like I said multiple times, all of Irvin's stuff is down in the description.
At Rotary Daddy on everything.
I hope you enjoyed this fat video talking about Irvin's RX7. I'm hoping there'll be a part 2. Whether you guys want it or not, I'm going to film one, so you guys are welcome to watch. That's about all we got for you today.
Yeah, make sure to like and subscribe.
Peace out.
See you guys later.
I like it.
Fuck yeah.